a frantic motorist in Titusville, Texas, slams on his brakes as his headlights catch a woman huddled in a ditch, zip-tied, duct-taped, and shivering in the dirt. This is Samantha Wolford, the beloved mommy vlogger, whose disappearance triggered a statewide manhunt. But as paramedics rushed to her side, the first responders noticed something disturbing. Her makeup is flawlessly smudge-free, and her bonds are just loose enough to slip. In the age of digital clout, Samantha wasn't a victim. She was a director filming her own series finale. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. Titusville, Texas, is the kind of place where the horizon feels like a physical weight. A flat, sun-bleached landscape where the local economy was built on the sweat of oil fields and the steady, unhurried pace of generational tradition. In 2015, the digital revolution was beginning to seep into these rural cracks, bringing with it a new kind of social currency that the town's older residents couldn't quite grasp. To the people at the local diner, a camera was for weddings and birthdays. To Samantha Wolford, a camera was a lifeline and a weapon. Samantha didn't fit the quiet, dusty mold of Titusville. Even in her youth, those who knew her described a woman who didn't just walk into a room. She entered it, eyes always scanning for an audience. She possessed a relentless, almost frantic energy that local acquaintances often mistook for simple ambition. She was an aspiring actress in a town with no stage, a performer with no script, waiting for a medium that would finally allow her to be the center of her own universe. When the mommy vlogger era of YouTube exploded in the early 2000s, Samantha found her calling. By 2015, the platform was no longer just a place for cat videos. It was a goldmine. Family channels were the new reality TV, turning mundane chores and toddler tantrums into million-dollar empires. Samantha watched these digital celebrities from her living room, seeing women just like her, young, blonde, seemingly perfect, building cult-like followings by selling the aesthetic of motherhood. She didn't see the hard work behind the editing or the loss of privacy. She only saw the validation, the likes, the comments that treated strangers like deities. She began her channel with a feverish intensity. Her early videos were a study in constructed reality. Carefully staged kitchen shots with soft focus filters, toddlers dressed in coordinated outfits that were too clean for actual play, and a perpetual frozen smile that never quite reached her eyes. She leaned heavily into the devoted wife persona, portraying a life of domestic bliss that was increasingly at odds with the mounting bills and the suffocating boredom of her daily life. To Samantha, if it wasn't captured on a memory card, it didn't happen. If it wasn't liked, it wasn't real. This psychological craving, often referred to as main character syndrome, began to alienate her from the community. Neighbors started noticing that Samantha was never without her tripod. She would film herself spontaneously, playing with her kids in the park, only to reset the scene 5 or 6 times because the lighting wasn't right or her daughter didn't giggle on cue. The children became props, small, living accessories meant to boost her engagement metrics. Friends who came over for coffee found themselves edited out of her life, or worse, scripted into her videos as the supportive best friend in a narrative they hadn't agreed to join. The disconnect was growing. While her online persona was gaining a modest, albeit stagnant following, her actual life was fraying. The high-definition world she curated for her subscribers required a level of financial investment she didn't have. High-end strollers, designer home decor, and the constant travel required to keep her content fresh. Her husband, a man whose hands were calloused from actual labor, grew increasingly baffled by the woman who would spend 4 hours editing a 3-minute clip of her making a sandwich. But as 2015 progressed, Samantha's numbers hit a plateau. The mommy vlogger market was saturated, and her perfect life narrative was losing its edge. She needed something bigger, something dramatic, a plot twist that would force the world to look at her, not just as a creator, but as a survivor. She began to realize that tragedy is the ultimate engagement driver, and if life wouldn't give her a tragedy, she would have to write one herself. Jason Wolford was a man carved out of the very limestone and cedar that defined the Texas Hill Country, a quiet, stoic figure who found his purpose in the tangible. He was a contractor by trade, a man who understood that a foundation was either level or it wasn't, and there was no filter in the world that could fix a crooked wall. To Jason, a home was a sanctuary, a place where the dirt of the day was washed off and the outside world was kept at bay. He had married Samantha because her initial vibrance felt like a sunbeam in a life of gray industrial sites. He mistook her restless need for attention for a simple zest for life, never realizing that for Samantha, the real world was merely a rehearsal for the digital one. The early years of their marriage were, to Jason's memory, relatively grounded. They lived in a modest ranch-style house on the outskirts of Titusville, a place where the wind carried the scent of dry grass and diesel. But as Samantha's digital footprint expanded, the house began to undergo a strange, unsettling transformation. It wasn't a renovation for comfort. It was a renovation for optics. Jason would return from a 10-hour shift to find the living room furniture rearranged, not for better flow, but to catch the golden hour light that Samantha needed for her weekly vlogs. The warm, lived-in colors of their home were replaced by an aggressive palette of whites and beiges. A sterile, minimalist backdrop that looked breathtaking on a 5-inch screen, but felt cold and inhospitable to a man with muddy boots. Their children, Leo and Mia, were born into a world of constant surveillance. Before Leo could even walk, he was being positioned on soft-knit blankets under ring lights that mimicked the midday sun. Jason often recalled the birthday parties, events that should have been milestones of joy, turned into grueling production schedules. Samantha would bake a 3-tier cake, not for the children to eat, but for the reveal. The kids were instructed to look surprised and giggle as if on cue. If Leo cried because the flash was too bright, Samantha didn't offer a mother's comfort. She offered a director's frustration, insisting they go again until the footage was clean. Jason told his coworkers he felt like a stranger in his own house, a man living in a museum where nothing could be touched, nothing could be messy, and everything was for sale. The financial divide became a canyon. Jason saw the bank statements, the hundreds of dollars spent on outfit hauls, aesthetic props, and high-end lighting equipment, while the actual roof over their heads was beginning to leak. He told Samantha they were living beyond their means. She countered that these were business expenses, investments in a future where they wouldn't have to worry about money. She spoke of brand deals and sponsorships as if they were guaranteed, while their reality was a mounting pile of credit card debt and a husband who was working overtime just to keep the lights on. Lights that were increasingly used to film Samantha, telling her fans how perfect her life was. Samantha's obsession wasn't just about money, it was about the hunger. Every like was a drop of water to a woman dying of thirst in a desert of her own making. She began to resent Jason's silence. His refusal to perform for her camera was seen as a personal betrayal. She told her followers that her husband was a private man, a narrative that made him look like a mysterious, romantic figure, while in reality, he was simply a man who wanted to eat his dinner in peace without a lens hovering over his plate. The tension reached a breaking point in late 2014, when Samantha realized that the perfect family angle was failing. The audience was bored. The comments were thinning. The algorithm, that cruel and invisible god she worshipped, was moving on. The community in Titusville began to view the Wolford household with a mix of pity and derision. At local high school football games or grocery store aisles, people would see Samantha holding her phone at arm's length, narrating her life to a phantom audience while her children wandered aimlessly nearby. She spoke to the camera with a familiar, high-pitched intimacy, as if the thousands of strangers on the other side of the screen were her only true confidants. Jason's family, traditional and private, began to distance themselves. His mother told him she couldn't stand the way Samantha exploited the children for clout. Jason defended his wife out of a sense of duty, but the weariness in his eyes was becoming harder to mask. He told his friends he didn't recognize the woman he had married, that she had become a composite of filters and scripted lines. By mid-2015, Samantha was desperate. She began to experiment with vulnerability as a content strategy. She filmed herself crying in her car, telling her camera that she was overwhelmed and struggling, though she never specified with what. These videos saw a spike in views. People loved a tragedy. They loved to see the cracks in the porcelain. Samantha watched the metrics with the cold precision of a scientist. She realized that her happiness was worth pennies, but her suffering was worth gold. The psychological shift was subtle but permanent. She started looking for ways to heighten the drama. She would exaggerate small illnesses or manufacture close calls in traffic to keep her audience on the edge of their seats. But even that wasn't enough. The comments started asking for more. They wanted to know about the danger of living in a rural area. They wanted thrill. Samantha realized that the only thing more viral than a perfect life was a life in peril. She began to study other true crime cases, not out of empathy, but for research. She looked at how the media reacted to abductions, how the public's heart bled for a woman taken too soon. She saw the way the world stopped for a victim. Jason noticed her becoming increasingly secretive, her nose constantly buried in her phone, her brow furrowed in deep, quiet thought. He assumed she was finally feeling the weight of their debt. He told her he was proud of her for slowing down the vlogging. He didn't realize she wasn't slowing down. She was just moving into pre-production for the biggest show of her life. She was no longer interested in being a mother or a wife. She wanted to be a headline. The night of October 14th, 2015 began with the kind of calculated normalcy that only a seasoned performer can maintain. A domestic scene so mundane, it was practically a script for her next upload. Samantha sat at the dinner table, the glow of her smartphone illuminating a face that had become a mask of digital ambition. She was scrolling through her engagement analytics, her thumb moving with the mechanical precision of a clockwork toy, watching the flatline of her recent views. She told Jason she was heading out to the 24-hour supermarket, a late-night run for organic milk and supplies she claimed were essential for the children's school lunches. She was wearing her uniform, the high-waisted yoga pants and the oversized salt and pepper hoodie that her subscribers equated with relatable, exhausted motherhood. There was no goodbye that hinted at forever. Only the soft, heavy click of the front door and the receding whine of her SUV's engine as she pulled out of the gravel driveway, leaving the house in a silence that would soon be shattered. Samantha didn't drive toward the fluorescent hum of the grocery store. Instead, she steered the vehicle toward the dark, jagged edges of the county line, choosing a stretch of farm-to-market road 3 miles from the town limits. This was a place where the streetlights were a distant memory, and the only witnesses were the scrub brush and the scavenging coyotes. The air was thick with the scent of parched earth and old asphalt, a sensory backdrop she had scouted days in advance. Samantha didn't just stop the car, she positioned it. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a production design. She angled the SUV so it sat half on, half off the shoulder. The front tires turned sharply toward the ditch to imply a forced detour. She left the driver's side door swung wide, a gaping metal maw that signaled a sudden, violent interruption of a peaceful journey. Then came the prop management. She took her iPhone, the device that had served as her digital soul, and tossed it into the tall yellow grass at the edge of the road. She ensured the screen was cracked just enough to imply it had been dropped in a panic, but not enough to suggest it had been discarded by its owner. She reached for a pint of blackberries she'd bought earlier in the day, specifically for this moment. She crushed them in her palms and scattered the dark, pulpy fruit across the driver's seat and the gravel outside, the juice staining the earth like old, oxidized blood in the moonlight. To a passing motorist, it would look like a struggle. To Samantha, it was just the right color grade for a crime scene. She took a single, white sneaker, the left one, and placed it 20 feet from the car, as if it had been kicked off during a desperate attempt to flee. She was building a set, every detail a brushstroke in a masterpiece of manufactured trauma. The logistics of the next 48 hours required a level of commitment that most actors would find agonizing. Samantha didn't go to a hotel or a friend's house. That would leave a digital paper trail or a witness. Instead, she retreated to a prearranged blind spot, a derelict wood frame hunting cabin on a piece of overgrown family property that Jason hadn't visited in years. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of dry rot and mouse droppings, but to Samantha, it was her dressing room. She began the degradation phase of her performance. She used a coarse piece of twine to bind her own wrists, pulling the knots with a grim intensity until the blood flow throbbed, creating the deep, purple-red welts that would eventually be her proof. She didn't eat. She barely drank. She wanted the gaunt, hollow-eyed look of a woman who had seen the abyss. She spent hours in front of a cracked, silvering mirror, practicing the 1,000-yard stare, the vacant, traumatized gaze that she knew would haunt a thumbnail and stop a scroll. She took a jagged stone from the cabin floor and abraded her own skin, creating struggle marks on her forearms and neck. Each scrape was a tactical move, a physical investment in her future fame. She thought about the headlines. She imagined the missing posters. She could almost hear the frantic, tearful voiceovers she would eventually record for her survival story video. For Samantha, the pain wasn't real. It was just production cost. While Titusville descended into a frenzy of search parties and panicked rumors, Samantha sat in the dark, listening to the wind howl through the cabin's cracks. She was hungry, she was cold, and her skin burned from the self-inflicted wounds. But she felt more alive than she ever had in her white and beige living room. She was finally the lead. She was no longer just a mommy vlogger, struggling for an audience. She was the most important woman in Texas. She monitored her progress through a secondary burner phone, watching the local news reports and the Pray for Samantha hashtags explode across social media. The numbers were climbing. The world was finally watching. By the time Thursday morning bled into the horizon, Samantha was ready for the series finale. She drove her SUV, which she had hidden under a camouflaged tarp in the brush, to a prominent shoulder on Highway 35, the main artery into Titusville. She exited the vehicle, leaving it idling with the hazard lights blinking, a rhythmic orange SOS that could be seen for half a mile. She crawled into the ditch, her clothes torn in strategic, censorship-friendly places, her hair matted with dirt she had meticulously applied with her own hands. She felt the bite of the heavy-duty zip ties she'd finally cinched around her ankles, tight enough to leave a permanent mark, but loose enough to be survivable. She lay there in the cold Texas mud, heart hammering against her ribs, listening for the sound of an approaching engine. She didn't feel like a criminal. She didn't feel like a liar. As the first pair of headlights rounded the curve, Samantha Wolford took a deep, shaky breath and closed her eyes, ready to give the performance of a lifetime. The director was satisfied. The stage was set. The sound of screeching tires echoed across the flatland. A man's voice, thick with panic, calling out to see if she was alive. Samantha didn't answer immediately. She waited for him to get closer, waited for the flashlight to hit her face, waited for the moment of maximum dramatic impact. When she finally opened her eyes and let out a scripted, guttural sob, she wasn't crying for her husband or her children. She was crying because she knew, for the first time in her life, she had finally gone viral. The pre-dawn light in Titusville usually brings the sound of rattling pickup trucks and the low hum of air conditioners. But on the morning of October 15th, the town woke up to a silence that felt heavy, an absence that Jason Wolford felt in his marrow. He had spent the night in the half-conscious state of a husband waiting for a car door that never closed. When the sun finally crested the flat Texas horizon and the children began to stir, asking for the breakfast their mother always meticulously plated for her, morning routine vlogs, Jason realized the milk run had become a nightmare. He called Samantha's phone 12 times, 12 identical transitions to a voicemail greeting that sounded like a relic from a different life. By 7 a.m., he was standing in the sheriff's office, his work boots still coated in the previous day's dust, telling the deputy that his wife, the woman with 10,000 followers, had vanished into the dark. The search began with the kind of frantic, uncoordinated energy that defines a small town in crisis. A local rancher was the first to spot the silver SUV abandoned on Farm to Market Road. He told investigators that the vehicle looked like a discarded shell. The hazard lights had long since drained the battery, leaving the car dead and cold in the morning mist. When Jason arrived at the scene, held back by the yellow tape that now cordoned off his family's transport, he saw the evidence Samantha had planted with such surgical precision. He saw the open door. He saw the single white sneaker lying in the dirt like a surrender flag. Most devastatingly, he saw the dark, pulpy stains on the gravel. To the untrained eyes of the volunteer searchers, it was blood, the violent end of a struggle they could only imagine in their worst fears. Within hours, the quiet stretch of road was swarmed. Titusville didn't just search, it mobilized. More than 200 volunteers arrived from 3 different counties, bringing horses, ATVs, and a palpable sense of communal dread. The local Baptist church became a staging ground, serving lukewarm coffee to men in camouflage who spent their day hacking through dense cedar breaks and scanning the muddy banks of stagnant creeks. They weren't just looking for a neighbor, they were looking for a predator. The rumor mill in Titusville began to churn out monsters. Stories of drifters seen at the local truck stop, whispers of a serial kidnapper moving north from the border, and the inevitable dark suspicion that always falls on the husband. The police treated Jason with the cold, professional skepticism reserved for the last person to see her alive. He was brought into an interrogation room that smelled of stale cigarettes and floor wax, where detectives asked him, repeatedly, if he and Samantha had been fighting. He told them about the debt, about the cameras, about the way his wife seemed to be living a life he wasn't invited to. He explained that she was a good mother, but a restless soul, a description that the investigators wrote down with deep, underlined heavy strokes. While Jason sat under the fluorescent hum of the station, the town was being draped in yellow. Ribbons were tied to every fence post, every mailbox, and every storefront along the main drag. The image of Samantha, the one from her most popular Spring Haul video, where she looked radiant and untouched by the world, was plastered on every window. But the search wasn't just happening on the ground, it was happening in the digital ether. This was the pivot Samantha had engineered. While she sat in her derelict cabin, the vlogging community was cannibalizing her disappearance. Fellow mommy vloggers from as far away as California and New York were posting emergency updates, using Samantha's name in their titles to capture the surging traffic. They spoke in hushed, somber tones about the dangers of being a public figure, essentially creating a recursive loop of content that kept her name at the top of the algorithm. Online armchair detectives began scouring her old videos for clues, interpreting a stray shadow or a tired sigh as a premonition of her abduction. They were looking for a villain, and they found one in Jason. They pointed to his lack of emotion in news clips, unaware that the man was simply a Texan raised to keep his grief behind his teeth. As the 48-hour mark passed, the Texas Department of Public Safety issued a statewide alert. The search expanded into the air. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras began sweeping the scrubland, their blades thumping like a heartbeat over the town. The fear in Titusville became a physical thing. Mothers kept their children inside. Doors that had been left unlocked for decades were suddenly bolted, and every dark-colored car seen on a back road was reported to the police as a suspect. The detectives, however, were hitting their first dead ends. The blood on the gravel hadn't been sent to the lab yet, but the lead investigator noticed a strange detail. There were no footprints leading away from the car other than Samantha's own, no scuff marks from heavy boots, no signs of a body being dragged. The red herrings were numerous. A local fisherman reported seeing a suspicious van near the river, leading to a 12-hour dive operation that recovered nothing but rusted tires and a sunken rowboat. A woman in a neighboring town claimed she saw Samantha in the back of a truck, triggering a high-speed pursuit that ended with a confused teenager being pulled over on his way to a job site. Every lead was a phantom, every tip a ghost. The frustration in the sheriff's department was mounting. They had a crime scene that looked too perfect, a staged tableau that felt like a movie set rather than a struggle. The atmosphere in Titusville shifted from hope to a grim, ritualistic mourning. The community held a candlelight vigil on the third night, a sea of flickering flames in the high school parking lot. They prayed for a miracle, unaware that the object of their prayers was currently watching them through a burner phone, measuring their tears in likes per minute. The search had become the biggest event in the history of the county, a multi-million-dollar production that was exactly what Samantha had always dreamed of. Except for one thing. The detectives were finally getting the pings from the cell towers, and the digital ghost Samantha thought she had buried was about to start screaming. The shift from a rescue mission to a criminal investigation began not with a grand revelation, but with the smell of the crime scene. While the town of Titusville was still draped in yellow ribbons, the lead forensic technician was kneeling in the dirt of Farm to Market Road, leaning in toward the dark, sticky stains on the gravel. He didn't find the copper-heavy scent of human plasma, the metallic, iron-rich odor that lingers in the Texas heat. Instead, he found something cloying and sweet. Laboratory analysis would later confirm what the investigator already suspected. The blood that had terrified a community was nothing more than a mixture of crushed blackberries and corn syrup, a concoction designed to look vivid under a camera flash, but one that lacked the biological reality of a struggle. This was the first thread in a tapestry of deception that began to unravel with terrifying speed. Detectives turned their focus to the digital footprint Samantha thought she had erased. While she had expertly discarded her primary smartphone, she had underestimated the relentless, invisible memory of the cellular towers that crisscross the Texas plains. Technicians found a ghost signal, a secondary burner phone that had been pinging off a tower near the derelict hunting cabin for the exact duration of her disappearance. This device hadn't been idle. It had been used to access Samantha's own social media accounts hundreds of times, showing that while she was supposedly fighting for her life in the hands of a kidnapper, she was actually refreshing her mentions and monitoring her own viral growth. The investigation then moved to the local hardware stores within a 50-mile radius. In a town as small as Titusville, strangers buying high-tensile zip ties and industrial-grade duct tape are noticed, but a local celebrity is remembered. Surveillance footage from a gas station 3 towns over, recorded 48 hours before the abduction, showed a woman matching Samantha's description perfectly. She wasn't acting like a victim, she was a consumer. The footage captured her calmly browsing the aisles, selecting the very restraints that would later be found binding her in the ditch. She even stopped to check her reflection in the glass of the cooler, adjusting her hair with the practiced ease of someone preparing for a photo shoot. When Samantha was found and brought to the Titusville Regional Hospital, the forensic nurses noticed further inconsistencies that didn't align with the narrative of a violent kidnapping. The struggle marks on her neck and arms were too clean. They lacked the jagged, irregular tearing characteristic of an external assailant. Instead, the abrasions were linear and repetitive, patterns consistent with self-inflicted wounds. Most damningly, there was the matter of her physical appearance. Despite 48 hours in a den of captors, her skin was remarkably hydrated, and the smudge-proof mascara she had boasted about in a previous Beauty Favorites vlog remained perfectly intact. She looked less like a survivor of a traumatic event and more like an actress waiting for her close-up in the final act of a prestige drama. The detectives decided to play along with her performance during the first official interview, allowing her to weave a tale of hooded men and unmarked vans. They watched as she leaned into the trauma, her voice dropping to a fragile whisper, her hands trembling with a rhythmic precision that felt rehearsed. She told them about the darkness, the fear, the way she thought of her children in her final moments. But when the lead investigator leaned forward and placed a printout of the cellular tower pings on the table, followed by a high-definition still of her buying zip ties, the mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. The air in the interrogation room became stagnant as the silence stretched out. Samantha didn't cry for her family or ask for a lawyer. Her first question to the detectives, delivered in a voice that was suddenly cold and devoid of the victim inflection, was to ask how many views the news reports had generated. She wanted to know if the search had trended nationally. She seemed less concerned with the impending felony charges for filing a false police report and more focused on the retention rates of her tragedy. Further searches of the derelict cabin revealed a production kit, a bag containing the blackberry juice, spare zip ties, and a detailed notebook. In those pages, Samantha hadn't written a diary of fear. She had written a storyboard. She had mapped out the discovery of her car, the clues she would leave behind, and even drafted the scripts for the post-abduction vlogs she planned to film once she was safely home. She had calculated the emotional beats of the town's grief, like a producer calculating the ratings for a season finale. The red herrings that had exhausted the local search parties, the suspicious vans and the phantom drifters, were all part of a narrative she had seeded through anonymous tips she sent to the police using her burner phone. As the realization of her hoax began to leak out to the local deputies, the mood in the station shifted from sympathy to a quiet, vibrating fury. They realized that the thousands of man-hours spent combing the brush, the hundreds of thousands of dollars in emergency funds, and the genuine gut-wrenching terror of the town's parents had been nothing more than set dressing for a 19-year-old's vanity. The main character had finally gotten her audience. But the applause was about to be replaced by the heavy, metallic sound of a jail cell door. The transition from local saint to town pariah was instantaneous. Samantha Wolford, the woman Titusville had spent 3 days praying for, was formally charged with filing a false police report and a secondary count of tampering with evidence. The trial was a sterile, procedural affair that stripped her of the cinematic filters she had spent years perfecting. In the courtroom, she sat with a practiced, hollow gaze, but the gallery was no longer her audience. It was her jury. The prosecution highlighted the $500,000 in wasted emergency funds and the psychological trauma inflicted on a community that had genuinely feared a predator was in their midst. Samantha accepted a plea deal to avoid jail time, receiving 5 years of probation and a mandate to repay the costs of the search. But the real sentence was the digital exile. Jason, the quiet contractor who had endured her narcissism for a decade, finally broke his silence, filing for divorce and securing a restraining order to protect their children from further exploitation. The director was left alone, in a world that had finally stopped watching. Samantha Wolford thought she was filming a masterpiece, but she only succeeded in burning her own life to ash. Today, she is a ghost in the town that once prayed for her, a cautionary tale for the digital age. Her children will grow up knowing their mother preferred a viral tragedy over their reality, while Jason lives in a house that finally feels like a home because the cameras are dark. In the end, Samantha got the fame she craved, but she's the only one left in the theater, watching a screen that's finally gone black. Please like this video and share your thoughts about this case in the comments. Be sure to check out our previous videos as well. See you soon.